Okay, welcome to our third of our public workshops on flood protection in West Sacramento. I'd like to introduce, well, first of all, I'd like to introduce the president of Reclamation District 900 and member of the JPA board, Bill Denton. Okay, and our meeting tonight, we've got like 4 different subjects. Ray Costa from Kleinfelder, who's doing the geotechnical work, is going to recap kind of where we're at on our levee evaluations. Bob Cermak from Parsons Brinkerhoff is the guy who wrote the engineer who wrote our engineers report and did a lot of the work for our assessment district. Shana Zussman is going to tell us, talk a little bit about the 2018 election and the balloting and the financing plan. And then Bill Hom from DWR is going to talk about the National Flood Insurance Program. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Lucy Edom, who's going to be your facilitator.
This is a second. Is that something I'm doing? Okay. If it does it again, I'm going to turn it off. You'll only have to listen to it one more time. I got 2 plus. No, I'm scared to go near it. Okay, I will not go near it just in case. So since about half of you are new, to let you know, this is a series of public workshops, and so tonight's workshop is building upon a foundation of information that was presented last month. So we can certainly answer your questions as well. We may direct you if there's some real specific questions that were covered more fully in last time's workshop. There will be an opportunity to get more detailed information at some breakout stations we're going to have downstairs after the first part of this workshop, just to let you know. So before we go any further, I just wanted to confirm that you all have a copy of everything that we'd like you to have. So a copy of a half-page sheet that you can write questions and comments on. You should have received also an agenda, kind of a packet. The top piece of information was an agenda. All right, so the second page is the agenda. There's the agenda, and then a copy of the Q&A on PowerPoint. And then a map, a color map of DWR flood zone information. Does anybody need additional copies of the handouts? And do you need everything?
No, I don't have the questions on there.
Okay, Megan will bring you any of the packets. Including the questionnaire. Okay. Let's see, I'll use this. So tonight's meeting, we're here to talk tonight about information about the West Sac levee improvements, costs, and financing plans. So last month we covered a lot of information talking about the state of the levees in West Sacramento, updating folks on the fact that although previously the levees had been certified as low-risk levees, new requirements from the federal government have reclassified a lot of those levees. That's a very lay, crude way of putting the information. But I did hear some discussion outside and just wanted to make sure that everyone was clear on the fact that there are new requirements and regulations from the federal government. So the levees are being looked at with a different type of scrutiny than they used to be. So just wanted to let you know that. So tonight I'm serving as a meeting facilitator. My name is Lucy, in case those of you who don't remember what Ken said, my name is Lucy. And so I am working tonight to help make sure that all of you have the opportunity to speak and be heard, that everyone has that equal chance. So we're going to do a question and answer session after the formal presentation where I'll ask you for your questions at that time. So you can raise your hand if you haven't filled out a comment card and I will call on you. And then I might make some suggestions if some of you are asking really detailed, specific information about perhaps your parcel or household. I will probably suggest that you talk one-on-one. There's a lot of folks here that are going to be able to answer your questions, so you can get through your question and get more specific feedback that pertains to your property at some of the workstations downstairs. And then what we'd like from you is just to hear as many of your questions as possible, and let us know specific things that you might have read that are unclear. We'd like to clarify as much information as possible tonight. That's why the city is hosting this workshop. So does anybody have any questions at this point in time? Okay. So a couple of things I put up here on the sheet, just helpful if we all are in agreement with how we're going to operate the meeting tonight. I call them meeting format agreements, so something that we can all operate by to get through the presentation and the Q&A session expediently. So the first one is actually number 3 I'll take first. If you could all turn off the sound on your cell phones and pagers and any other beeping devices that you might have, we would appreciate it. If you do need to take a call, if you have it on silent, if you could please step out one of the doors and take your call out in the hall, that would be great. If you could keep your side discussions to just outside in the hall. Sometimes you'll want to make comments to your neighbor, and it makes it difficult for other folks to be able to hear the presentation. So we ask that you don't have any side discussions. And if you could hold questions until the end of the presentation. It worked really well last time we did this, and we were able to proceed forward in the meeting in an orderly fashion. So we've given you these comment cards, the little half sheets, and you can just jot down your questions. And the last time we just categorized them, so we answered all the cost questions together, all the costs about the regulations at the same time, and it helps rather than bouncing around from topic to topic. So does anybody, just checking again, need a copy of the PowerPoint or anything? Okay. And other than that, we are going to do a formal presentation and then do the Q&A session. And then downstairs, just so that you know, there will be breakout stations. There will be several computers operating for the flood assessment calculators. So if you want to know specifically what your flood assessment is going to be, and you haven't had a chance to get on the internet yet, or you don't have internet access, we're more than happy to plug in your information into the calculators downstairs, and they'll tell you specifically what it is, what the amount will be. There'll also be a station on the financing plan. The Department of Water Resources will also be having a station, the National Flood Insurance Program, a station, and then also one on emergency preparedness. So you can leave here tonight armed with information on all of those various topics. So does anyone have any questions before we get started with the formal presentation? Yes? Sure. Last time we covered more in depth just the history of the levees in West Sacramento, and then talked about the findings of an engineering report that had just been completed showing the state of the levees in West Sacramento as they relate to the new standards that the federal government has put out. That was the main bulk of it. We heard a lot about the state's flood program as well, but really the bulk of it was going over the state of the levees. There's a little bit of a peek into the cost information, but that's more of tonight's focus. Is that helpful? Anything more specifically? Okay, all right. Yes? Yes. That is on a different map. There are several different maps in order to keep them not as busy. There are a number of different maps, just so that you know, on the website, and also that are printed out in various locations. So that map is showing the flood depths, but there are maps that clearly show the repairs that are needed in each of the 10 reaches. Anyone else? All right. Without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Ray. And Ray's going to talk to you about a review of some of the engineering report findings.
Well, as Lucy mentioned, previous meetings we've talked more at length about the conditions of the levees and what we've been doing out there to try to assess these conditions. Thought thought we'd bring a couple of pictures tonight. We've been telling you about these things and thought it might be useful for you to actually kind of see what it is that what we're dealing with out here with some of these old levee systems. Stephanie, can I have that first slide, please? Here you can see some of the construction techniques used at the time. You can see where they're making some excavations and they're piling it up here and they're making a levee. I had some comments to make about the horsepower of the equipment, but I think they're mules, so I won't make that comment. You can see in the background here there's an old bridge. I talked to Ken Rusich about where that might be. He mentioned that's a bridge that is actually no longer existing, but it's kind of in the north half of the city along the Sacramento River. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of the levee being constructed out along the Yolo Bypass. That Yolo Bypass area used to be kind of a swamp area, and you can see where these dredgers go along and they have a bucket. They come along and they just pick up the mud and the cattails and the tules, and they put it in a big pile and it kind of oozes around and they kind of shape it up so it looks like a levee, and that's what we have along the west side of the city. This is an area along the Sacramento River where the levees were constructed using a dredge technique. And very hard to see, but right there at the bend in the river there is a dredge that sucks the sand up off the bottom of the river and basically puts it in a pile along here. These are some branches and brush that's put there to kind of keep the material from just running back into the river. So you can see this looks like a day at the beach here with the nice sand up on the levee. So that's what we've inherited out here in the levee system. We have some levees that are about 100 years old in some cases, built with probably not modern construction techniques, and now we've got considerable amount of people and property behind them. You know, before when we had prune orchards and open spaces, it wasn't as big an issue, but now it's very important to have safe levees. The legacy that we have, you can see that the levee embankment that was constructed here, this is just kind of a cross-section to show you what a typical condition might be, built on different layers of soil that were naturally deposited by the river with time. Because of the the natural river processes, we can have erosion problems. We have this underseepage issue where water can actually seep underneath the levee. Freeboard, you can imagine some of these levees with time will settle and sink, so they're not as high as they used to be. So we need to make sure that we've got an adequate amount, that they're built tall enough to contain that water that we think is going to come down the river. And then I mentioned the erosion conditions. It's just some photos of some of the things that we're concerned about. This is some pretty severe erosion and overtopping. This levee wasn't tall enough. If you've been following some of the flooding issues back on the Missouri River that are going on right now, a lot of those levees are failing because they're overtopped. They were just ag levees that weren't high enough, and water goes over the top, erodes it, and pretty soon the whole levee fails. Here's some conditions of a lot of wind erosion, wind and wave erosion. This is something that's a real threat out along the Yolo Bypass side of the city. And this is kind of a diagram to kind of show you this underseepage condition that I talked to you about, where basically water flows underneath, can carry material, and create a hole, and the levee can fall into that. Erosion, you can see a levee right here where there's been some emergency work to try to protect that. This is actually a condition, I believe, along the West Sacramento area there, where you can see, again, these old layers that are just being eroded back. What's been completed here in the last few months is we've gone out with drill rigs. We've taken core samples at different locations, try to find out where that strata is. We take those samples back to a laboratory and we test them, see how permeable they are, see how strong these samples are, so we can evaluate what kind of safety factors we have for our levee system. What are some of the things we can do to solve the problems? Certainly this under seepage issue, we can build what's called a cutoff wall, where we dig a trench and fill it up with a low permeability clay cement mixture to reduce seepage. Next. We can increase that freeboard in the areas where our levees are a little bit low. In some cases, we can actually build a seepage berm on the back side, provide weight to kind of hold down that seepage pressure that's coming from the river. On the water side, we can place rock out there and provide erosion protection along there. This is a kind of a diagram. Someone mentioned earlier, where are these repairs going to be made? This is kind of we have a lot more detailed information, but this just gives you a general idea. Kind of set the area here. Here's the kind of the northern part of the city. Certainly Highway 50, Interstate 80, Yolo Causeway, Yolo Bypass over here, and then the southern part of the city down here. We've kind of divided them up into reaches that we've looked at so we can make some specific assessments. Just real quickly, I'm going to start up here in the upstream end of the system. You know, we've got a condition along here. We have some seepage issues. We've got some kind of steep slopes. Going around the corner, we actually have some under seepage issues. Last year, we had a little bit of under seepage problem through there. Small boils formed. We're going to take care of that. Kind of some oversteepened slopes along here. Then we get down to the downstream area there. This area kind of has a lot of issues there. Pretty much everything I talked to you about. Some freeboard issues, some erosion issues, some under seepage issues. Probably a lot of work going to need to be required along here. This little reach here is kind of it's a back levee. It's a dry levee. You may not have even noticed it out there, but that protects the city in case a levee breaks downstream so that the water doesn't come back up and flood the city. And then we have some levees along the west side. Few seepage problems over here, a few seepage issues. You may have read in the paper about an area of the city that's had a little bit of some cracking of the levee embankment, a little bit of slope movement. That's along this area right here. We're going to get that fixed also. So that's kind of the quick version. We gave a longer version last time, but these are the issues that we're dealing with. It's the history that we have and the types of fixes we're looking at. Thank you.
I did need to make one brief correction. The last public workshop was actually about emergency preparedness. So the workshop before that was the topics that I discussed. I've completely blanked on my mind that other workshop. So just to clarify that. And then I'll turn it over to Shanna Zussman from the City of West Sacramento to talk about the proposed financing plan.
Thank you. I just was going to briefly talk a little bit about the upcoming process and the vote for the assessment district. Just a few things for terminology. The assessment district that's being proposed is really a public financing mechanism. The law requires that a mail-out vote go to all property owners. Now, you might hear the term annual parcel assessment. That's also the same thing, but we're talking in this context about the proposed assessment district for flood protection. So just want to, in terms of updates, the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency, which is the JPA, between the City of West Sacramento, RD 900, and Reclamation District 537, did pass a resolution last week on May the 8th that directed staff to proceed with the assessment district process. And so according to the law, we do have to do a mail-out vote to all property owners, and those ballots are scheduled to be mailed on May the 22nd. The balloting process for every dollar that your proposed assessment is, that's the number of votes that you get, and that is required by law. Proposition 218 does require that. So anyway, if you're a property owner in the room, then you will be receiving a ballot relatively shortly. Again, May 22nd, they're scheduled to go out. We are doing another open house workshop on June the 5th. So if you have questions about your specific ballot, at any time, feel free to call. There'll be some numbers later in the presentation, but if you want to bring your ballots in that day, we can kind of talk about them and go over any of your questions on June the 5th. July 10th at 6 p.m. here, the Flood Control Agency Board will meet and essentially close the balloting period. So it's a 45-day period that you have to return your ballots. And you can actually physically walk into the council chambers and bring your ballot up until 6 o'clock that evening. And then July 16th at 3 p.m., the board is going to reconvene, and we will announce the results. So based on, again, that weighting of the votes according to the financial obligation, we'll tally up the results and make a decision as to whether the ballot measure passed or did not pass. If it did pass, then on your tax bill in December from Multnomah County, you will receive a replacement to your existing flood control assessment through the JPA, and it'll be on your tax bill in December. One other thing I wanted to mention about the process is we heard from some folks at the last workshop about some concerns for folks who were on fixed incomes. And so we are developing a program that looks at a deferral program. So if that is a concern to you, please stay tuned and talk with us, and we are kind of developing that program. I don't have any details with me tonight, but we did hear that as being a concern by some people last time. I want to now turn it over to Bob Cermak. He's an engineer with Parsons Brinkerhoff. The law, when you put together an assessment district, does require that an engineer prepare an engineer's report. And he did the work for us. He also did the work in Sacramento. I don't know if any of you have been reading the paper and learned about the ballot initiative that went on across the river. So he's going to go through and explain all the details of the formula. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Shanna. Ray explained a little bit about what the physical improvements are that are needed out there for the levee improvements, and Shanna talked about the balloting process. I'm going to kind of tie the two together in that the physical improvements are what's needed to be done, and to pay for that, there's a local share that needs to be raised. That's the assessment. That part of that local share comes from assessment revenue. And that's what the ballots that Shanna mentioned that are going to be in the mail shortly will be sent out to all the property owners in West Sacramento. That will allow you to cast your vote on whether you support or don't support the new assessment district. What I'm going to explain is how those assessment amounts were determined in terms of what's the cost for the project and a little bit about the financing assumptions, and then specifically the assessment formula and how individual parcel assessments are calculated. Ray mentioned that for analysis purposes, the area that's being protected was divided up into several reaches. This is the same picture as Ray had before, showing the reaches along the Sacramento River, the Sacramento bypass, the Yolo bypass, the Deepwater Ship Channel, and then that little cross canal levee at the bottom. Within those reaches, here's a list of what based on the preliminary engineering studies that have been done to date, have identified as improvements. This is kind of the overall collective amount of each of those types of physical improvements. So cutoff walls that Ray mentioned, that vertical wall that was cut down, usually down the middle of a levee to prevent seepage, through seepage or under seepage. There's 40,000 lineal feet. This is kind of in length that's required in various reaches for that particular type of improvement. A seepage berm is another way of addressing an under seepage problem, in that you in effect lay soil, construct an engineered berm that provides a weight or behind the levee to resist that same under seepage water that's trying to come up through the levee. So that's another particularly where there's room, where the right-of-way is available and there's room. That's often a more desirable one, just because it's a little bit less costly, sometimes a lot less costly. Relief wells are another way of pumping out if water does seep beneath the levee or around the levee. They can pump it out and discharge it in a controlled manner into drainage ditches. Levee raise, Ray mentioned freeboard. If the levee's not high enough, this means that the levee has to be raised up a little bit higher. Levee crown flattening and slope flattening, these are changing the geometry of the levee to meet the required design criteria. Some of it's a little bit changed criteria that was mentioned earlier. The federal standards for levee cross sections have changed a little bit from what they were in the past. And erosion, that's on the water side. That's just caused by the velocity of the water and over a period of time, where it just eats away at the water side of the levee. So those are the physical improvements that need to be done, and again, it's based on the preliminary engineering to date. The price tag for those improvements is estimated at $400 million. That $400 million is assumed to be shared between the federal government, the state government, and the local sponsors. In coming up with a financing plan, we had to make certain assumptions as to just how much would be the local share, and what that local share is will vary depending upon the specific arrangements that are made with the state and federal government. For the purposes of calculating assessments, we tried to make fairly conservative assumptions, and we assumed that the local share would be 21% of the total cost. So that local cost of at 21% of $400 million is $84 million. So that's what the local share is assumed to be. That $84 million is projected to be provided through two mechanisms. One is what's referred to as an in lieu fee. This is a fee on new development that the City Council approved just a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember, Shannon would know the exact date. So it's already been approved, and new development as it occurs will pay a specific development fee that is contributed to the cost to paying for the local share of the flood control improvements. The other half of that $84 million, the $42 million, would come from assessment revenue from this annual parcel assessment that would be levied on properties within the assessment district. In addition to providing the cost for the capital improvements, the levees need to be maintained in terms of just normal maintenance, as well as in an emergency flood operations. And in addition to the annual to the cost for the capital improvements, there's an allowance for operation and maintenance cost of a little over $500,000 a year that's needed. The new assessment district would replace an existing assessment district that pretty much all of the property owners in the district currently pay. So if, when the ballots are returned and the JPA votes to implement the district, then that old assessment district would go away. The new district would be put in place if the board approves and if the vote allows them to do, and it would remain in place until the board determined otherwise. The assessment amount, there are specific amounts that are established for each parcel. Those amounts they can be raised as much as 2% a year, just to allow for inflation in the cost of what the physical improvements would be over time. But no more than that. So when you see what your amount is, the amount that you have would not increase any more than 2% a year. The assessment is what's called a special benefit assessment, and by that, by Proposition 218, it requires identifying what is the special benefit that's received, and to allocate the assessments in proportion to the benefit that's received. For this assessment district, the way we measure benefits are flood damages, or really the avoidance of flood damages. And it's flood damages to the structure and to the contents of a structure, and it's flood damages to the land itself. The way the parameters that we use to calculate those flood damages are it'll vary by land use. whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, vacant parcels. It'll vary by the size of the lot, the parcel acreage. The structure, the first floor square footage we use, not the total building square footage, just the first floor square footage. And an estimate of the depth of flooding that would result if a major flood, the type of flood that these improvements are intended to avoid, would actually breach a levee, kind of and the depth of flooding that would result. That's an indication of kind of how much flood damages an individual structure would experience. The flood depth map, and I think in your handout there's the larger size of it. This is based on work that was done by the city by another consultant for some emergency preparedness work, and it's divided up into flood depth zones, and these are generalized zones from the areas that are 0 to 1 foot, particularly along the triangle area, and a little strip along the north side, 1 to 5 feet, 5 to 10, and then greater than 10. There's questions. I think that the suggestion was if you could please hold your questions to the end of the discussion, and then we'd be glad to answer them, if that's okay.
Do you need a sheet to fill out your question on? No, I don't. It was just kind of clarification. Okay, you can ask it. I was just wondering if that's based on 100-year flood, 200-year flood?
It's at least based on a 100-year event flood. Okay.
You know what, Mike, now I've opened it up. What is a reach?
A reach is just a length of levee. It's just a section of the levee. It's just a way of subdividing the total thing, just to be able to say what happens in different places.
Are there any other clarification questions?
Okay.
That's all right.
Next slide, Stephanie. The actual calculation of the assessments are done or can be calculated in two, whether it's a residential structure or a non-residential structure, and using slightly different information. If it's a residential structure, the pieces of information that you need to determine is, one, what flood depth zone you're in from that map or from some other information. You need to know the size of your parcel, and you need to know your first floor square footage, whether it's less than or greater than 1,050 square feet. For residential structures, we put all residential structures into two categories: the smaller structures that are less than 1,050 on the first floor square footage, and the larger structures that are greater than 1,050. Based on those kind of three pieces of information, there's a formula, and actually it's a table where you pick off two numbers, and in your handout there's a very small version of that table which is not very readable at all. We have made copies, full-size copies, and I believe they'll be available downstairs or outside the door where you would actually able to actually read those small numbers. So I apologize that you can't read them now. But in that table, what you would do is you would go to a column that, for residential structures, that would identify which of the flood depth zones, the 0 to 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, or greater than 10-foot flood depth zones. You'd look under the row that was either, if your building square footage was less than 1,050 square feet or greater than 1,050 square feet, and you would pull off two numbers. One would be these. One would be the building factor, and the parcel acreage area. That's that top line. And then the other one would be this this building factor constant. In the next slide, it'll actually show an example. It'll be a little bit easier to show how these numbers are used. For this example, it's assumed that it's a two-story structure, residential structure that's in flood depth zone 2, which is in the 1 to 5 foot flood depth range. And the parcel acreage, the lot size is 0.17 acres. And it has a first floor square footage, not including the garage. The garage is not counted when we determine first floor square footage, of 1,200 square feet. So that would put it in the greater than 1,050 square foot category. From that table, you would look under that residential greater than 1,050, you look under the column that is for flood dip zone 2, and you would find that there's a multiplier of about 48, 47 point something times the acreage, and the constant of about 110. In the formula, you just take that 48 times the acreage and you add to it the 110, and you would get $118 would be the assessment for that parcel. In this way, if you have different properties that have different acreage or different building size, you can quickly calculate what the assessment amount is. In the website that the workstations downstairs have, there'll be a way to look up the specific assessment amount for each individual parcel, just knowing the parcel number for that property. So you'll be able to determine from the stations downstairs exactly what your assessment is. That's the same amount that will appear on your ballots when you receive them when they go out in the mail about in a week or so. The amount of residential assessments overall, about half of them will range between $40 and $100, and about half of them will range between $100 and $130. So there is a distribution of assessments. A lot of it's tied to the main two characteristics that determine assessments, whether it's a smaller square footage or a larger square footage, and whether it's in one of the shallower or one of the deeper flood depth zones. In the next slide, it illustrates how the number of parcels that are in different ranges of assessments. So it shows that in the range from 40 to 60, and then 60, 80, and 80 to 100, just how many of assessments how many properties, residential properties, would be paying assessments in those amounts, as well as the larger buildings or the deeper flood zones would be paying in the 100 to 120 range. For commercial and industrial properties, their assessment is calculated quite similarly, except that they would be using their actual first floor square footage, not put into categories of square footage. Their assessments will range, because there is much more variability in the size of industrial and commercial properties. The assessment range will vary more. This shows that they're kind of divided up into approximately ranges of a third. About a third of the commercial and industrial properties will have an assessments less than $100. About a third will have between $100 and $1,500, and about a third will have greater than $1,500, ranging all the way up to in excess of $30,000 for some of the larger properties. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Lucy to introduce the next speaker.
So short. So I'd like to introduce our last speaker is Bill Hom from the National Flood Insurance Program.
Good evening. Before I start the presentation, I would like to see a show of hands up. How many of you have some knowledge of the National Flood Insurance Program? Okay, quite a number of you. So I'm going to present to you a little overview of the program, because that will affect some of you, okay? The National Flood Insurance Program is a federal program, okay, and it was created by Congress. The key component of the NFIP is the mapping, flood insurance, and floodplain management ordinance. FEMA will do study in the community and issue flood insurance rate map for a community. And then when the city joins the program, then the flood insurance will be available to that community. But the city, when they join the program, then they have to agree to enforce the NFIP regulations. They have to adopt a floodplain management ordinance. I'm going to introduce to you three flood zones that most likely that you probably will see in the future flood insurance rate map for your city. The first one is called Zone AR. The definition is that the areas previously protected by an accredited flood protection system, which is a levee that has been decertified and is currently in process of being restored to provide at least a 100-year level of flood protection. Which means that when FEMA finds that the levees protecting the cities have no longer providing the 100 years level of flood protection, then they will, assuming that levees not exist. And then during the meantime, when the cities, city doesn't mean that your city, could be any community that agrees to restore to repair the levees, then FEMA will designate the area behind the levee called the AR zone. Okay, next. Zone A99 means that areas to be protected by the 100-year flood level upon completion of an under construction federal flood protection system and no base flood elevation determined. What it means is that when a community repair the levees and then to a point that more than 50% completion, then FEMA will redesignate the area behind the levee from Zone AR to Zone A99. Okay, next. And then Zone X means that area protected by levee from flooding. Okay, and West Sacramento is currently designated as Zone X. So that means that right now that your city is in Zone X. Okay, I'm going to provide a couple of slides. One is for residential construction, residential structures, and the other will be for commercial structures. This is just a sample of flood insurance premium, okay, for a structure that with the maximum coverage of $250,000 and also with the contents of $100,000 coverage. Okay, these are the insurance premium. There's a flood policy called preferred risk policy. This policy applies to the Zone B, C, or X. So, for example, if you are going to go buy the flood insurance tomorrow, then you will be eligible to prefer the so-called preferred risk policy, the Zone X. And with the maximum $250,000 coverage and the content $100,000, your annual premium is $317. And for the P-firm, post-firm, those are the area, the policy for the buildings located in Zone AR, A99, B, C, or X. The B, C, or X, those buildings that have previously got damaged from the flood and have claims. So they can, for those buildings in the B, C, or X zone, they are no longer eligible to purchase the preferred risk, and they have to buy the so-called P-firm or post-firm policy. The annual premium for those buildings will be $1,000 and $32. And then the next one is so-called P-firm buildings, meaning those buildings that are older buildings that before the FEMA issued the first map for the city. Okay, so those buildings, the annual premium will be $1,822. For the post-firm buildings, means that for any buildings built after FEMA issued the very first flood insurance rate map for the city, and for those buildings that when the finished level is at the BFE, means the base flood elevations. When FEMA issued the map, they will determine how high the flood level will be. It will show on the maps. So when the living floor is built at the BFE, the annual premium is $1,050. And if the home is elevated just 1 foot higher, the annual premium just lower to $700. And then if the building wants to elevate it in another foot higher, like 2 feet above the BFE, the premium even lower to $526. And then the 3 feet high will be $486. But if a building just happened to build 1 foot below the BFE, okay, just for whatever reason, just didn't build to the BFE, and you can see that the premium jumps to $4,500. Okay, next. And this is the same premium, but it's for commercial buildings. For commercial buildings, the maximum coverage for the structures is $500,000. The content is also $500,000. So for the preferred risk policy, the annual premium is $2,300, and for the pre-firm, post-firm buildings, it will be $34.92. For the pre-firm buildings in the A zones, it will be $74.28. And for the post-firm building, at the BFE is $4,700. You can see that. If it's elevated just 1 foot or 2 feet high, you can see that the great savings right there from $4,700 lower to $1,460. And then if just 1 foot below the BFE, you can see that it's $17,000 a year. Okay, next. This is a insurance industry's have a study to show the statistics that for a house located in the floodplain and during a 30-year standard mortgage period, it only had 1% chance of catch fire. And the same building in the floodplain during this 30 years period, it has 26% chance of getting flooded. Okay, you can see the probability is much higher. The risk is much greater. There's 26% chance of getting flooded during the 30 years mortgage period compared to 1% chance of catching fire. And that is the reason that a lot of private insurance companies, they don't offer flood insurance. Okay, and I have 3 slides that provide 3 questions that are commonly asked questions. One is what percentage of Californians living or working in the floodplain that have flood insurance? In California, there are a total number of 272,320 flood insurance policies in place. In the Central Valley, approximately 53% of the total number of parcels subject to flooding carry flood insurance. Next. Okay, this is a very common question. Does your homeowner or commercial insurance cover flood damages? No. Standard homeowner insurance and commercial insurance do not cover flood damages. Flood damages are covered in a separately purchased flood insurance policy. And some mobile home policy may include flood damage. So it's very important for homeowners to know that the regular homeowner policy does not cover flood insurance. A lot of homeowners find out after they're getting flooded, and which is kind of late. Next question, when is federal flood insurance mandated and who is eligible? Federal flood insurance is mandated for all structures with federally backed loan or mortgage located in the special flood hazard areas identified on the flood insurance rate maps. And any homeowners and renters in the NFIP participating communities can purchase flood insurance through the NFIP. Okay, and I brought with me some pamphlet that is available downstairs for you to take home. One is called The Myths and Facts About the NFIP, and then the other is called Why You Need Flood Insurance. And then also I have a handout called the Sample Flood Insurance Costs that kind of give you some samples of different type of flood zones insurance on residential and commercial structures. And then lastly, I have a guide that you could go into a FEMA website called the floodsmart.gov. Then it is a very user-friendly website. And what you could do is that if you want to find out how much flood insurance for your homes, you could go into the website, and then this is a step-by-step to show you how to get to find out how much flood insurance for your house. I have this one handout, and also I have demonstration downstairs. I have a laptop that you could If you want to, you can type in your address, and you'll come up with how much flood insurance premium for your house. Thank you.
So just in closing, the city, the Reclamation District 900, FEMA, and the Department of Water Resources encourage you to purchase flood insurance now before the costs go up later. So there are a number of different ways that you can get further information before we break into the Q&A. You can see there's a website that has a lot of information on there. It could keep you busy for days and days if you poke around in there and look at the engineer's report and other information. We encourage you to do so. There are also going to be the breakout stations downstairs at the end of this workshop. There is another workshop on June 5th. And then there's also a phone number listed up there that you can call. So you should all have copies of all of this in your packet if you want to do any follow-up after the meeting today. This kind of direct you on how to do that. So we're going to break for a moment. If we could maybe have the lights up. If you could all fill out your questions on the half sheets of paper. Like I said, we're going to organize them during a brief break and reconvene about 7:35 by that clock right there. That'll give us about 7 or 8 minutes to coordinate all the questions and give you a break. So just you can hold your half sheets up. We'll come and grab the questions, and then we'll see you back here in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Okay, thank you all very much. Sorry about the delay. Finally got this to stay down. So I'm going to start out with having Ray answer some questions that are more engineering related. So the first one is, how deep will the cutoff wall be below the level of the river? Is this a standard depth or are there variables?
I'm going to change the height of your. I just wanted to point out something here real quick. I don't know if you've been following the news here this evening. I told you that the city is surrounded by water. The whales are coming right up here right now. If you're wondering where the Deepwater Ship Channel is, they're working their way up to the port. So that's where the whales are. Okay, back to your question. The cutoff wall. You saw this diagram earlier trying to show this internal trench that's filled with cement and clay. It's constructed to a depth where you tie into a kind of a clay or real low permeability layer down there. You want to cut off as a seepage barrier across there. The question is about the depth. It's variable, kind of depending on the geology out there. For most of the alignment, it's probably less than 80 feet deep, but quite frankly, there are some areas where it's maybe 150 feet deep, where a conventional cutoff might not work, and we're going to look at some of the other things that Bob talked about, relief wells and seepage berms. But it's a variable depth. That's why we go out and do these core borings. We try to find where that clay layer is down below the sand, so we can cut that off.
Okay, the next question for Ray is, being that we have many under seepage issues, what is the chance that our levees will be compromised while trying to repair them? Will we be repairing them with deep cutoff walls?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's something you have to be very careful about. If you've been in the area for a while and you've seen some of the work that's been done on the other side of the river, they in fact did have some problems in trying to construct the cutoff wall. Some of these levees are so weak that just digging a trench and filling it full of this heavy fluid caused the sides to fall into the river, and it was an issue. So we're very much aware of that problem, and we take precautions. We actually lower the levee down closer to the ground surface so that the levee's wider down there and it can contain that. But you have to be very careful, and certainly these repairs are done during the summertime. We anticipate if, in fact, there is some kind of a problem, we always give ourselves plenty of time to come in and recover before the flood season would start. So it's a good question. We're very conscious of that, and we'll be making sure that we don't come up with a repair that's worse than the problem that's out there to begin with.
Okay, a couple more questions for Ray. What level of flood protection will be provided by the levee repairs? And then the example is 100-year, 1%, 200-year. And then has CEQA been complied with already, or do EIRs need to be done following the assessment vote?
The city's made it very clear that for an urban area like this with what's at stake, we're going to try to get as much protection as we can. We're trying to get the 200-year level protection. So anything that we do out there on these levees will be to achieve that 200-year protection. As far as the CEQA, that process will just be starting soon. That's not kind of something I do, but I'm in the room with those people that are doing that type of work, and I know that that process will begin soon and will have to be completed prior to these repairs going forward.
Okay, and a couple of more questions for Ray. When will the engineering design be completed and construction commence? Is the city of West Sacramento finished with testing? If not, how do we know that we need $400 million?
Answer the first question, when will the design commence? The city's made it clear that they want to get started on repair work immediately. We're trying to reduce the amount of exposure time. The State of California Department of Water Resources, who's one of our partners in this process, they are also anxious to show that they can get this work done. Had a meeting with them, as a matter of fact, this afternoon to coordinate when this is going to start. Again, depending upon the results of this election, but the design would probably start towards the end of this year with the intent of beginning first part of construction probably next summer. So the idea is to, it's a question that's going to be answered later, how long does all this take, but we've got to get started, can't do it all at once. As I mentioned, there's only a certain period of time you want to get out there. It's only safe. Obviously can't do it when the river's up. So there's a limited construction season, and we're going to optimize and try to get as much done in those as we can. But hopefully the first project should start next summer. What was the rest of the question? Oh, are the drillings completed? No, there will be more drilling. There's been a lot more extensive drilling kind of done in the north half of the city. Can feel reasonably, have a better confidence that we know what the conditions are up there. The southern half of the city, we've done the initial borings. We have a pretty good idea. Quite frankly, the initial borings have shown problems. Can't tell you the truth, can't imagine it getting much worse. More information is not going to tell us that necessarily that there's more work, because there's a lot of work to do down there already. So there will be some of that work done. There's also some work being done, and there'll be you'll see some information probably on radio, and you won't see it on radio. You'll hear about it on radio. You'll see it on TV. The state of California Department of Water Resources is doing some work where they're doing some surveys of the levee. They have a device that they can fly over the levee alignment, and it will detect soil layers up to 100 feet deep. And so we're out there with our borings, taking these core borings at intervals anywhere from 500 to 1,000 feet. What we're going to have with this airborne survey is we're going to get a pretty complete look at the levee system and make sure we haven't really missed anything important. It's that defect that you want to be able to find. It's the weak point that we need to find. That work's going to happen. You'll hear and see read and see it probably beginning here within the next month, and you'll see helicopters flying around the city probably in June or July.
So I think that was all the questions for Ray. So next, I'm going to have Ken answer some questions. Ken is from the WSAFCA Flood Control Agency. So I'll ask you two at a time, Ken, because you have a lot coming up.
Okay.
So if this bond passes, what dollars will pay for the maintenance? Who will get the work done first?
I'm not sure.
If this bond passes, what dollars will pay for the maintenance? Who will get the work done first?
I don't know what they mean by who.
I think what area of town?
Okay. Okay. If the bond passes, how much money is going to go for maintenance? That's that $588,000. So yeah, it has to be split up based on acreage. The bulk of the acreage within the city is within Reclamation District 900. We have an existing assessment, but it isn't adequate to cover all the maintenance. And in order to pass the last flood protection assessment, which was many years ago, we actually cut our assessment rate in half in order to mitigate the cost of the new bond. So we've been kind of operating on a shoestring for a long time, and so between this new money and the existing money, we'll be able to catch up on some of the stuff that we haven't done. In terms of what work gets done first, they'll prioritize the repairs based on the information they find, and we will start with the areas that we feel are most critical. Some of it depends on funding. So some of it, if we can get state and federal funding for some of the projects, they may get going. And if we can't, then we may do some of the work in different order. But basically, it'll be based on the priority and availability of money.
So the next question is, what will happen if the assessment does not pass?
Okay, if the assessment doesn't pass, the existing assessment will stay in place for a few more years. That project is almost completed, and we've reached the spending limit, or the limit on that assessment. So that project will be paid off in a few more years, and then that assessment would go away. At which point we would not have any local share to participate in any of the federal or state projects. So we would just simply have to, if a site got critical in an emergency, we would have a federal response to repair it, but we wouldn't be able to be proactive and go out and fix things ahead of time.
How much dollars do the feds have now for flood and levee protection?
There's one of the big problems. The federal government is spending a lot of money in a lot of other places, and so they have a fairly large budget for flood control, but nothing compared to the magnitude of the work that we're talking about doing here. So one of the plans is for the state and the locals with their cost shared money to actually kind of do the initial work, advance the money, and then the federal government would provide credits for us, and later on either pay us back or come up with their share as the work progressed. We still want to pursue these projects as federal and state projects in order to get the cost sharing. But there may be a time gap in order to get the funding from the federal government. So it's a very tough, complicated process to work through the federal appropriations process. But we've got an awful lot of people working on it to try to get some money to get our projects going.
When will the official reclassification of the flood status happen, and when will the cost to the property owner go up?
Tentatively, based on discussions with FEMA, the city will be get some provisional maps showing that we don't have 100-year protection in December of this year, and then a year later we would be officially designated as having less than 100-year protection. So it's very important in order to get the best buy on your flood insurance in that period before, a year and a half from now, to have a flood insurance policy in place.
Does the extra assessment end when the levees are fixed, and how long will the levee repairs take?
The assessment doesn't end when the levees are fixed because we have to basically what we do is borrow money against the assessment in order to have the money on hand in the early stages. We can't wait 15 or 20 or 30 years to collect all the money to pay for the project. So basically you get a bond and you pay for that, and then over a 30-year period you actually pay that bond off. So the time period we're actually paying for the levee improvements are far beyond when you've completed the project. We hope to get work going next summer. An awful lot of it is based on availability of state and federal money, but we really hope to have the bulk of the work in progress within about 3 years, and sometime hopefully, optimistically, maybe within 5 years have the work completed. I mean, if we had money, everything in place right now, we could have everything completed within probably 3 years, but funding is not that easy, and it's going to take some work to get all the federal and state money in place. So, but realistically, probably more in the 5 to 7 year time frame.
When will the repairs be done, and will there be a need for any more insurance, or will West Sacramento become a Zone X?
Okay, the objective is to complete the work and get redesignated as Zone X. And that, all that does is remove the federal requirement that where you have to, you're mandated to have insurance on federally insured loans. It's prudent to have flood insurance when you live in an area that is below water level, and so it's always prudent to have flood insurance, even if you have a rating of Zone X.
Since our area will soon require water meters, why can't those who stand to benefit from the South State pay for the lion's share of the costs?
I wish there was some sort of a tie with water meters where we can get some extra funding that way, but realistically, there isn't any tie. This is a very specific project for a specific problem, and so we have to approach it that way. There's one more. There's this sheet here.
Oh, okay.
And the first one's mine, and the rest are Bob's.
Okay. So the last question for Ken is, what is the total linear feet of levees in West Sacramento?
Okay. In the actual town of West Sacramento, we have roughly 25 miles of levees that surround the city of West Sacramento. But one of our problems is that we are exposed to flooding from the deep water channel being breached far down because of the water surfaces out in the deep water channel. We could have a breach 10, 15 miles down the deep water channel, which would come into the channel, come back up the channel, and flood us. And so, but we have to actually analyze and improve those levees as well. And so it just about doubles the mileage. So it's more like 50 miles if you throw in those levees.
Okay, now we're going to have Steve Paytek from the City of West Sacramento answer some questions. So the first one is, if the proposed assessment does not pass, how will the levee rehabilitation work be prioritized to be done with the available funding?
I'm not sure why that's my question, but if the assessment doesn't pass, we will probably try to get state funds, though we're probably a lot less likely to be successful. And with the other source of local funds being development in lieu fees, if the assessment doesn't pass and we are remapped, we are likely to be mapped into a zone that would basically preclude any development. So if the assessment doesn't pass, I don't know that we're going to be able to do a whole lot of levee improvement.
A couple of more questions for Steve. If we have documentation stating our levees are below the 100-year flood designation with the new criteria, is it against the law to move forward with development plans not knowing how FEMA will map our area? And a follow-up question, why hasn't FEMA been to West Sacramento? They have been to Natomas. We've been told that FEMA will not be here until 2009.
Well, the answer to the first question, is it illegal for us to proceed with the knowledge we have? And the answer is no. We are currently Zone X under FEMA. We will be Zone X until FEMA says we're not. We have a flood management ordinance in place which basically says development has to comply with whatever standards are in effect at the time you pull a building permit. So if we get remapped into one of the A zones, regardless of use permits, general plans, subdivisions, when somebody comes in to pull that building permit, they're going to have to comply with the requirements of the zones. In an AE zone, that's going to be a requirement that you build a house above the floodplain, which is practically impossible. In an AR zone, there are still some provisions for development in much of the city, though you might have to raise the foundation 3 feet. And if we're fortunate enough to get an A99 zone, then there really aren't any other restrictions than what we have now. And in terms of FEMA, FEMA is in the process of really remapping virtually the entire country of areas surrounded by levees. So it's a huge task, and they are working through it. They've actually been working on it for a number of years. In Northern California, they sort of started in the Bay Area, and they've been working their way east. Natomas is a little bit of a fluke. I think got a little more high profile and some other reasons that they moved ahead on Natomas, though they're not looking at the rest of Sacramento, just Natomas. Again, we're in regular contact with FEMA. We talk to them regularly. They know our status, they know our levies, and they're quite comfortable staying to their timetable for preliminary maps this end of this year and potentially a final map at the end of next year.
So some questions for Bob Cermak. Where are you, Bob? In the PowerPoint, it is a violation of state law to charge an assessment or a fee based on land use designation. It can only be calculated on actual use. So that's actually just a statement. Do you have any comment you'd like to make to that?
The assessment formula is based on relative benefit, and land use is used to decide to classify properties into these generalized land use categories of residential, commercial, and industrial, and then with the building square footage and flood depth zone, that's how we come up with the flood risk, and so there's no violation of that as state law. In fact, Proposition 218 requires that we determine the relative proportional benefit of properties and assign the assessments in that proportion. So it's in compliance with state law as far as I am aware.
The city's share has historically been 7 to 10%. Why is it 21% now? Is the money restricted to levy repair or operations and maintenance?
I think Ken mentioned when one of the questions about the our federal funds available, there clearly is going to be competition to get federal funds. In developing the financing plan for this assessment district, we attempted to take a fairly conservative approach of something, assuming a local share greater than what has been in the past. That's primarily because there's not an officially federally authorized project for the improvements that are planned. There certainly is the expectation and hope that there will be, but it's not in place right now. So that's why the assumed local share is greater than it has been historically in the past.
Yes. Okay.
I'm sorry. What was the second half of the question? Is the money restricted? Right. Yes. The money is restricted. The money cannot be spent on any project or feature that's not identified to be part of the assessment district, and what the project features are identified in the engineer's report. They are, in general, those types of flood control improvements that were listed in the PowerPoint. So it has to be on flood control. It has to be for the levee improvements. Because so far the engineering that's been done is preliminary engineering, we don't know definitively exactly, the depth of the cutoff wall, or whether it's reach A or reach B. We have a good idea where it is, but there still needs to be some additional investigations. So within the flexibility of still to figure out exactly what the physical improvements are, but it can't be used for some non-flood control purpose at all. If it's not identified in the engineer's report, it can't be used.
Kind of a related question to what you were talking about a minute ago, Bob. Why is the local share here 21% and the city of Sacramento it's 10%?
The assessment district that was recently voted on and approved in Sacramento for the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency included projects that do have some existing federal authorization. They're kind of a continuation of an existing project. So there is more certainty on those projects as to what the federal participation is going to be. As I mentioned previously, right now the projects that are identified here do not have that federal authorization. So without having that certainty, the assumption was to assume a larger cost share, and perhaps some projects where the state and the local share have to cover it, at least initially, with upfront funds.
Okay, 2 more questions. Why the big inconsistency on the assessment amount with people on the same block, and then the calculator changed amounts from one day to a different amount on another day?
So those are the two I was checking to see if those are.
The assessments for a similar property, by similar property, if it's on the same size of a lot, if it has the same first floor square footage, or at least within the same category, less than 1,050 or greater than 1,050, the only reason it should vary then is if it's in a different flood depth zone. And so it is conceivable that within a block or even across the street that one property will be in one flood depth zone and they'll be on a different flood depth zone. So that would be the reason for it. It's kind of, we have to draw the line somewhere between these boundaries of flood depth zones, and so it will show some properties, adjacent properties, paying slightly different assessment amounts because of that. The second part of it was
Why do the calculator amounts change?
oh, why the calculator amounts changed. The city on their online calculator had assessment amounts that were based on a draft version of the engineer's report, and during that period we received some information from the public and other sources that allowed us to clarify and correct some of the data that we were using in terms of parcel characteristics as well as other information. And when we incorporated that new information, we recalculated assessments, and so the assessments did go down in general for all properties between the draft version and what is now on the calculator and what is now the amount that will be appearing on the ballots.
Shouldn't there be a different charge for people that have homes that are at the first floor versus those who have homes, I'm sorry, on a 2,100 square foot first floor versus those with a 3,200 square foot first floor?
Part of it is a limitation on the available data. We just not have the detailed building square footage for all the buildings, for all the residential structures in West Sacramento. Out of the 15,000 parcels in West Sacramento, about 12,000 of them are single-family residential, so it's clearly the bulk of them are those. And given the data that we did have available, our best judgment was to put them into at least two categories of a smaller size structure and a larger size structure, to at least represent the relative difference in the potential flood damage that might occur in those two categories. And it's been done before, and it's at least showing, reflecting the difference between larger and smaller homes. It's not showing the difference as each, for each individual square foot that increases between one home and another.
Is the formula the same for all commercial buildings in the same area if they are all the same size on the same lot but built with different material?
Yes, building material does not enter into the determination of an assessment for commercial or any other land use category.
At one of the workshops, it was mentioned that the minimum assessment amount would be $60, but your chart shows lesser amounts, which is accurate.
The charts that I showed are accurate in that they're based on the actual assessments that are calculated that are on the ballots. I think that for the earlier workshops, they were prior to us finalizing the engineer's report, so we were basing it on what we knew at that time, and it was a generalized amount as to what the kind of the minimum assessment would be. There are assessments now that go down quite small. Again, it depends on the size of the parcel, the size of the building, and the building in the flood depth zone. So it's the ones that are shown now, and the ones that are you can determine for individual properties at the workstations downstairs are the correct amounts.
Can you please clarify the difference between the in lieu fee at 10.5% and the assessment fee at 10.5%?
The in lieu fee is a fee that was adopted by the city 2 weeks ago or something like that. It's a fee specifically on new development. It is in addition to assessments. The assessments are on existing properties. I might say as well as when new properties do develop, if there's a vacant property and a structure is built, when they pull the building permit, they're going to pay the in lieu fee. Then when that property is constructed, they will start paying assessments based on its developed category. So they'll pay both assessments and the in lieu fee when it first develops. The 10.5% is just showing about what the share is that over the overall program of how much revenue will be generated from each of those sources, about an equal amount from both sources, both the in lieu fee and the assessment revenue over time.
Is it a 2/3 or majority vote? And then why isn't the flood risk or depth higher nearer rivers and ports?
According to Prop 218, what it is it's a simple majority of those votes that are returned. So it's only based on for those ballots that are returned within the time period, the authorized time period. If 50% plus $1 vote is in favor or against, that's the side that would carry. The other question was? The flood depth zones are in terms of whether they should be greater near a levee or river. They're really based on ground elevation. If the flood depth zones are based on some hypothetical levee failures at different locations around the city, and based on the volume of water that would enter, and areas that are lower lying areas clearly will be flooded to a higher depth, and they'll have higher flood risk, and their benefit is greater. So if there's an area adjacent to a levee or river, the Dippewater Ship Channel, for example, if the ground elevation is lower, it will be in a greater flood depth zone. Areas that are in the water itself clearly are not benefiting. They're already contain water at all times.
Okay, your last question, Bob. Can the money be moved from one area to another because you deem something like the lower part of the Deepwater Ship Channel more in need after we have voted for our immediate area needs?
Well, similar to the one question was asked, the funds can only be used for the authorized flood control project. Within that project, it will be the responsibility of the JPA to determine both in terms of what projects are most needed and which ones are ready to go to allocate the funds for it. So there's a priority that will be established for those projects, but it's a matter of all the projects that are needed to accomplish the overall 200-year level of protection will need to be constructed, and they'll be using this fund. So funds can be moved from one segment to another, but it's only for the authorized project.
So Ken, there's a couple more questions for you, and then Bill will be our last person. When will all of the levee repairs and upgrades be completed?
Okay, I think I covered that. We hope to get the bulk of the work done within 5 years, but depending on funding, it may take a little longer than that. But we're estimating something in the 5 to 7 year range.
How was each reach decided?
It's just based on the geotechnical data they develop and what it takes to get back up to the 200-year level of protection for each reach. So.
One more, Ken. You can't sit down yet. At the first workshop, the Army Corps of Engineers and FEMA said that there wouldn't be any designation as long as the repairs were ongoing. Why is the city telling us the opposite?
I don't know that they said exactly that. Back when we did the previous project, we were able to get an A99 designation, which actually did allow us to do our project and not have increased insurance rates. But that's a designation that's difficult to achieve, and based on what we know about our levees and the conditions we're faced with, it's very unlikely that we'll be able to achieve that. So we'll probably go into an AR zone or something like that, which will require a designation of less than 100-year protection for a period of time. But our objective is to get back to the X as soon as possible.
Okay, so the last speaker is going to be Bill, and I've got a couple of questions for him, and the rest of you can go head downstairs and staff the stations down there. So first of all, is it possible to purchase supplemental flood insurance to cover more than $250,000 for the structures under the federal program?
The answer is yes. There are few private insurance companies offer so-called excess coverage. There are two companies that I could think of on top of my head. One is AIG, I think called Airline Insurance Group. The other is Royal of London. Okay, this I could think of right now, but I have a list of private companies in my office that I could share with the city, with Lucy. Okay. But there are excess flood insurance available from private insurance company. But the deal is you have to purchase the NFIP insurance first, and you have to purchase to the maximum amount before they will offer you the excess coverage.
When will the rate change to the AR zone rates?
When will the rate change to AR zone rate? When FEMA issued the new maps that shows the areas in the zone AR, then the insurance will be effective. When they're going to issue the new map? Right now, we don't know. Could be a year, could be 2 years. But at this moment, the city is in the Zone X. And also for your information, the insurance premium for Zone A99 and AR is the same. Okay? It's only the construction requirements are different between Zone AR and Zone A99. But as far as the insurance premium, they are the same.
Thank you. And like Bill said, there is a computer downstairs where they can plug in your information and tell you exactly what your insurance rate would be, which I know that it's been almost 2 hours of talking to you, so we really appreciate your hanging in there. And I know some of you that don't have access to the internet or didn't realize that you could look up information on the internet about your individual anticipated flood assessment, that's really probably the reason why you're here. So there are a number of computers downstairs and staff there to support you in making sure that you are aware of what your upcoming flood assessment will be. There is the final workshop on June 5th, and we really appreciate your attendance at this meeting tonight and all of the information that you have listened to. So thank you again, and we'll see you downstairs.